to this session on the topic of vulnerability assessment and pen testing in OT environment, VAPT as it is called in the short. It's going to be an interesting, I guess, 30 to 40 minutes, because we'll talk about some things that that are it's a little bit contentious in the industry how the term VA and PT is interpreted. So we'll talk about the differences and how each of the VA and PT is suitable in the OT environment. A couple of things, because this webinar will be also posted on YouTube. So this is being recorded on 31st of July, 2025. And the opinions and I guess topics discussed, they are my current opinion based on my experience and my background. I can change my opinion going forward as well, but I try to simplify complex topics to focus more on the practical considerations as opposed to theoretical discussions. So sometimes I make statements that are a bit controversial and may not be aligned with the mainstream opinion. Everybody has a right to disagree, and I'll be happy to get into some kind of a constructive discussion or dialogue as needed. I avoid naming any particular vendors or products, but if I do, it doesn't mean any kind of endorsement or otherwise. So a little bit of a disclaimer. Let me just share my screen and then we'll start the discussion. So while I do that, we have a couple of polls, some questions to get to know the audience a little bit. So let's throw the first question out there. This can take a couple of minutes, not too much. I'll appreciate if everybody can respond to the questions. It'll help us tailor the discussion to the audience. So the first one is, which of these domains is the closest to your primary job function or primary area of expertise? I asked this to get to know the audience a little bit. So please just let us know. We'll take another maybe 30 seconds. So all right, so we have a mix of control system, OT security, IT security. So it's a good mix. Let's move on to the next one, please. So if you have ever done VA, not PT, if you've ever done vulnerability assessment in OT environment, did the results of the VA help you in strengthening the cybersecurity defense in your organization? All right, so an equal amount have not either done the VA and OT environment, or the outcome didn't help them in terms of strengthening the defenses. A few of you have benefited from it, which is typical, I guess. I'll wait maybe a few more seconds. All right, at least some have benefited from it significantly, so that's also good. All right, so let's move on to the next one, please. Now let's talk about the PT part, the pen testing. Have you ever done pen testing in OT environment? And if you did, was it successful? Was the pen tester able to penetrate the OT environment or not? All right, so at least there are some people who were able to get into the where the pen testing was successful. So definitely we'd love to, a few folks. So we'd love to hear from you when we have more question answers at the end. I'd love to hear from your experience on how the discussion from today relates to to your experience with the pen testing in OT environment. So it seems like a few folks did have successful penetration in the OT environment in the PT exercise they did. So that's good. All right, so let me share my screen and we will continue the discussion. All right, so let's get into the details. You've already gone through the housekeeping. A very quick introduction of myself. My name is Mubarik Mustafa. I have over 30 years of experience in hardcore industrial automation, control systems, programming DCSs, PLCs, SCADA systems, and then for the past 12 years or so in OT cybersecurity with a few credentials to go by. Very quickly, just to make sure that everybody is aligned when we talk about, because there are a few folks in the session today who are from maybe not hardcore OT environment. So a very quick definition of OT. When we say OT, basically you've all seen some kind of industrial plant. But this is one picture of one of the industrial facilities, and I'm sure you know about some kind of control rooms where operators are sitting in front of some screens and trying to operate the plant. So the actual computers and networks that constitute the control systems that help operate the plant safely. That's basically the OT environment. We talk about the environment could be in the power industry. You may have some power plants, some power distribution, transmission infrastructure. So the control systems managing the power plants themselves, or the substation automation systems, and maybe the central control centers connecting everything together. All this constitutes ICS or OT environment. Or it could be something like this, a SCADA environment for maybe, I don't know, a pipeline or a water distribution environment where the control assets are distributed at a geographically dispersed location connected through some kind of a WAN environment with a central control center. So all this is typical example of control systems. And we will use some of these graphics to make a point about VAPT going forward. So examples of OT systems, whichever ones you can relate with, it's good to have a little bit of a connection with what we are talking about, whether it's in oil and gas, petrochemical, electrical power, water, wastewater, even building management. All these systems constitute control systems. So with that background, let's get into the topic of VA versus PT. We'll quickly try to define the terms VA and PT. VA, as we all know, is vulnerability assessment. And the way I see it is basically a systematic process to identify, categorize, and prioritize known security vulnerabilities without actively exploiting them. In my definition, this is what vulnerability assessment is. And the keyword over here is without actively exploiting them. There are different methodologies and approaches on how to do VA. We'll talk a little bit about it moving forward. But pen testing, as opposed to VA, is more, I guess, active in the sense that it's a controlled, simulated cyber attack. Sometimes it's not even simulated. You're actually trying to break into the network or the system to actively test and exploit the vulnerabilities that may exist in the network and the system and assess the effectiveness of the defense. So it's practically hacking. Okay, there is no difference. It is hacking, but yeah, it's ethical hacking. It is done after permission from the asset owners to test the defenses of the ICS environment. While the goal is the same in both cases, which is to find any weaknesses that can be exploited, even if you're doing vulnerability assessment, in the end, you're just trying to find weaknesses that may be exploited by uh, a potential attacker. And of course, if you're doing pen testing, once again, you're testing those defenses to see if the weaknesses, if the defense is strong enough, or if there are still any weaknesses in the defense. The challenge that I see is that these two terms are often used interchangeably, or sometimes collectively, or together, which creates a little bit of a confusion when we are talking about, let's say, some action that an asset owner wants to perform, or scope of work written in an RFP or in a project scope. Sometimes the two terms are used interchangeably, or sometimes even in a lot of cases together. It's written like this, VAPT, which causes a little bit of a confusion in some cases. So we'll discuss what the differences are. In my opinion, there are some commonalities between the two. So a lot of you have already responded to the polls that you have done pen testing or vulnerability assessment. A lot of tools and the techniques may be similar, and when you're doing pen testing, you do end up doing a little bit of vulnerability assessment so that you can do the pen testing. So there are some commonalities between the two. However, there's significant differences as well. And that's where in my opinion, the a little bit of confusion lies, and we'll try and address that confusion today. So I have something on the screen. I'm not going to be able to do of course, you cannot answer the question, but maybe a thumbs up. Those of you who think this is a vulnerability assessment, I hope everybody recognizes this picture. This is the Tesla Cybertruck, and there was a demonstration on stage to show that the windows, the glass on the windows is very strong, and it can withstand when somebody throws a rock at it. So those of you who think this is a PT, give me a thumbs up, please. All right. So yes, it is pen testing, because we are trying to penetrate the glass of the window. There is no assessment in terms of whether the glass is strong enough to withstand it. We're just throwing a rock at it to see whether the defense is good enough or not. And as you can see, and I'm sure you know the story, that no, the glass broke. But it is, in my opinion, an example of a pen testing as opposed to vulnerability assessment. I'll show another graphic over here. So this is some person, poor guy, holding an umbrella with a lot of holes in it. Should I be doing pen testing here or vulnerability assessment? So if any one of you think let's say I'll ask the same question. Those of you who think we should do a pen testing to determine where the weaknesses is, give me a thumbs up. Well, I didn't see any thumbs up, so yes, everybody thinks that we don't need to do a pen testing to determine that there are holes in this umbrella. We can actually see them. We can see there are 3 holes. There might be 3 more in the back of the umbrella, the other side. But yes, we don't have to pour water on this poor guy on top of the umbrella to figure out how much water goes down, or whether the person stays dry or not. We can see that if it rains and the person is carrying the umbrella outside, there he will get wet. There is no question about that. So it's kind of like the same concept of VAPT. And just to elaborate that, I like to give analogies. It helps understand the topic a little bit better. This is a house. I'm sure all of us, wherever we live, we try to protect our house, maybe the valuables that are inside, the precious things that we have inside, whether it's our family or some money or gold or jewelry. So this is a house that has apparently lots of windows and doors which are not necessarily well protected. Do I need to do PT over here? Just like that umbrella person, I can hire a pen tester and ask him or her to do pen testing. And of course, if the pen tester tries to get in from here, all the person has to do is take off a few nails and the person can get in. So the pen testing is, in this case, is not going to be very beneficial, in my opinion. As opposed to that, if I try to do vulnerability assessment over here with a predefined requirement on what type of vulnerabilities I would like to find, then a VA person can come in and look at every window and the door, and then have maybe a checklist that what worked and what didn't work, and then give you a report that, okay, these are all the vulnerabilities that you have. That would be a better way uh, of understanding, or at least making a list of all the vulnerabilities that we have. And once we have done the vulnerability assessment, then we can implement the security controls to strengthen our defenses. Maybe put some lock on the door, maybe put some grill on the window, or whatever that is. We can do that as well. So this basically is the approach. And yeah, once you're done with that, then you can engage like a hacker or an intruder or a tester that, okay, well, now that I have all my defenses done, can you come in and try and break the defenses to see if the defenses are strong enough? So that, in my opinion, is the pen testing part of it. Even if I do that, even when I'll go back to it a little bit. Even when I'm doing this kind of pen testing after doing the vulnerability assessment and the implementation, the pen tester may still be able to break the lock or may still be able to get in. For example, obviously this is a door, so the door will not stay locked all day and all night. During the day, the door is supposed to be open, and at night, somebody is responsible to lock the door at, I don't know, 8 o'clock, 8 p.m. So the day the pen tester came in and tried to get in, the door was locked at 9 p.m. And the pen tester said, well, everything is good, there is no problem, and that's it. And the next day, the person who was supposed to lock the door forgot to lock it. Now, you still have a vulnerability, but the pen tester didn't really catch that vulnerability. So there's a very like a minute difference between the two approaches. Vulnerability assessment is a very methodical approach to check for all the vulnerabilities that you may have in a system. And pen testing is a very specific, I guess, activity. We'll talk about that going forward. So let's look at the VA versus PT in the OT environment. Obviously, the challenges in OT environment, a lot of you may already be familiar with it. It's a multi-layered architecture, segmented networks, sometimes disconnected networks as well. There is specialized software. We all know that, you know, the DCS and the historians and the analysis and all those things. There are a lot of legacy systems. It could be in the workstations, Windows XP. We all know about those things, or even the controllers and the PLCs and all that. Some of these are maybe 20, 30, 40 years old and may not have all the cybersecurity features in there. There's this perceived sensitivity to active scanning, and I'm very careful in choosing my words, perceived sensitivity to active scanning. And those of you who are interested in this topic, my next webinar will be on the topic of active scanning in OT environment. So we'll discuss that in more detail next month. But yes, there is some sensitivity, at least in the asset owners, that they don't like active scanning in the OT environment. So that's another challenge. Limited offline environments for testing. So this could be, you know, the control system for a refinery, and the refinery is running, and you don't have a duplicate copy of the whole system where you can do the pen testing, the vulnerability assessment. The industrial operations themselves, there are operational procedures and constraints that you have. So the plant operations may not allow you to conduct certain activities. They may not even allow you to do a vulnerability assessment at some point in time. If the refinery is or the plant is in a critical operational mode, they may even deny you to come in and do VA, and definitely not pen testing in that particular case. So, and then there are safety and regulatory concerns that prevent certain activities from happening in the OT environment. So the challenges are quite different from IT. I'm trying to stay away from the traditional IT and OT comparison, assuming that a lot of you folks already understand that, and then that topic has been addressed quite significantly by a lot of people. So specifically, vulnerability assessment in OT environment. It's often done passively or non-intrusive. While there is some active scanning, in most cases, the vulnerability assessment is passive or non-intrusive. It, of course, is done in a way to minimize the risk of disruption to critical systems, to the plant operations. But more importantly, it follows a predefined set of requirements. So whatever different baseline requirements you have produced, either of your own for your own facility, or if you're using, I don't know, CIS benchmark or anything, you will basically go step by step that which of these vulnerabilities exist in each of the system, each of the components. So it's a very methodical step-by-step operation. It's a mix of automatic and manual work. There's a lot of manual, in my opinion, a lot of manual work in the vulnerability assessment. If you're going to do a true vulnerability assessment, it will require you to go through things manually. It's not like, yes, you can install and run certain VA tools. And again, I'm not going to name any. I'm sure you know plenty of those. But they're not going to give you a true picture in a multi-segmented, disconnected environment where you have all those constraints about what you can and cannot do. So the true VA will require a lot of manual steps that you need to do. But still, it's a very methodical step-by-step process. In my opinion, it provides you very deep insight into the vulnerabilities. So it's going to tell you every nook and crook. If you have done your homework correctly, it's going to tell you about every nook and crook where you may have any vulnerability, any kind of leak that can, any kind of weakness that can be exploited by somebody. If it's done properly, the VA will give you vulnerabilities, not just for the technology part, the hardware and the software and the firmware. Oh yes, you know, that operating system has CVE, XYZ, and CVSS, ABC. Those of you who want to go into that, please, you can, there's another webinar on patch management that, vulnerability management that covers this part. But yes, a proper VA will give you not only the vulnerabilities in the technologies, but also in the system design, in the implementation, in the configuration, but most importantly, even in your people and process part of it. I'll give a couple of examples over here, and more examples will follow going forward. That, for instance, do you have backup for a certain computer? You know, in a control system architecture, there is an engineering workstation which has the critical configuration of different PLCs and all. Do you have a backup of this computer, or do you have a backup of the configuration files? A PT will not tell you that. But if you do your vulnerability assessment and include people and process in it, include the technology in it, then you will discover that, well, this is a vulnerability that the backup doesn't exist. So the vulnerability in this case is not necessarily just in the technology, in the firmware, in the hardware, and the software. It could be, it basically covers, like I said, deep vulnerability insight. As opposed to the VA, the PT part is obviously intrusive by nature. It is high risk in live OT environment for obvious reasons, because in operational plants, you don't want to try and penetrate and break something that ends up affecting the operations of the plant. So it is high risk in that sense. It does test real world attack paths. You can start from the from the IT network, try to pivot into the OT environment, do lateral movement. So it does test realistic and paths that an attacker or a hacker could take to get into your system. So in that sense, it's good. But the scope and sometimes the depth of it is usually restricted. So it requires strict planning into what systems you can touch. Maybe you can do in an offline or a lab environment, which may not be 100% replica of the complete system. So the scope and use cases will be limited. Maybe you will just test the segmentation from IT and OT, maybe a few application testing. You may not be able to demonstrate the impact of the exploit because the impact would be shutting down the plant or the facility, which you don't want to do that. So it does provide you a snapshot of some of the vulnerabilities that exist at that particular time. So that's a little bit on the PT side. What I'll do is that for the next maybe 5 minutes or so, I'll try and give some real use case examples of where the VA and PT, how they would be beneficial in a real control systems environment. So I've brought up here two system architectures, control system architectures. Let's talk about the VA. If it's a systematic VA, you would start at every level. First, like I said, that you will make a checklist of which items you would like to check. And then you will check it over here at the RTV level, at the PLC level. On this, it looks like an inverted wireless network. On this MTU, at every level, you will make a checklist and check for whether the vulnerabilities exist or not. And I'm strictly talking about the technology part of things right now. So you will verify on each system, and yes, you will use some automated tools wherever possible, either for doing some scanning on the network, or maybe installing some software on individual systems to check for the vulnerabilities, or maybe some network vulnerability scanning tools that look at the span port. So you could use different technologies, but you would go from top to bottom and left to right, include even the vendor networks, maybe the local control terminals, the corporate networks, any web-based applications, any firewalls, the configurations inside the firewall, the username and password inside the firewalls, the switches, the ports on the switches, which ports are enabled and disabled, how many VLANs are configured, are there routing enables on different multi-homes. So you could have a long list of possible vulnerabilities to check for, and yes, it's going to be a quite intensive exercise. Same thing on this environment as well, going deep into every system to check for vulnerabilities. That's something that you would do when you do the VA. Now let's see what happens if you try and do PT. Obviously, in a running plant, I would be surprised if any asset owner would let you do PT at this level. At the low level foundation field bus or any kind of process network, even on the basic control network, or even sometimes even on the supervisory network. Rarely an asset owner would let you do PT on this part, which is okay, which is fine. In most cases, they would say, okay, well, how about you connect your computer over here and we'll give you access to it depending on if it's a black box testing or gray box or white box testing. They would give you certain access to the network itself. And then they would say, okay, well, try and break into this firewall. So yes, you will do network scanning. How many ports are open on this firewall, which services are open, which computers are here, which are communicating with the OT environment, and then maybe trying to get into those computers on the IT side. So usually you would be trying to get access to some kind of device at this level, at the enterprise level, and then try and pivot into maybe the process information network or the so-called DMZ. At least this is something that I've seen happening in operational plants as well, where the clients would like to do PT to discover whether the defenses are strong enough or not. And very rarely, they let you get into the level 3 part of things. However, a lot more use cases I've seen in during the project stage or when the plants are shut down. I have been involved in a few PT exercises where the the project was in the factory acceptance test phase, FAT, and all this equipment is still in the vendor's workshop or the I guess the panel shop, if you may, and they're basically they have connected all the networks, all the computers to test it. And yes, the VAPT can be done over here, or I'm sorry, the PT can be done in that environment, but still there are limitations because not all the systems are fully operational the way they're supposed to. All the users that would be logged in over here, PT is a very intense exercise. You really have to maybe sometimes steal credentials. So if there is no real user using email here or using FTP to access the PIN network or the OT network, then it'll be very difficult for the hacker to or attacker or the pen tester to actually steal the credentials and come down here. So while this pen testing is beneficial to a certain extent, maybe it is beneficial to the extent that for the device itself, you can check maybe the firmware's any vulnerabilities in the firmware, maybe the open ports and the credentials. So there are a few things you can do, but still, it's not a true reflection of a real plant environment where it is operational. Users are using the computers the way they're supposed to and the way they're not supposed to. People are, plugging in USBs where they're not supposed to, and clicking on phishing emails and all. So it's a little bit difficult to replicate the real environment into an offline or a staging environment where you can do your testing all the way down to maybe level 2 or level 1. So while the PT use cases are there, they do let you test some of your defenses at certain level. In a lot of cases, uh, they are not able to achieve in the OT environment. They are not able to achieve the results that are typically expected in the IT environment. Maybe some of you who have experience with it, especially the ones who were successfully able to penetrate, they can ask questions or share their experience in the chat later. But a lot of reports that I've seen regarding pen testing, literally at the end of the report, and I'm talking about reports from very well-renowned companies who are experts in pen testing, and in the end, it says that, we were not allowed to take certain actions to penetrate the network because we didn't have XYZ access or ABC information. So at most, what they were able to do, they were able to tell you that, okay, well, this Windows server has patches missing, and this computer has, I don't know, FTP port enabled, and this computer has those HTTP port enabled. So yeah, these kind of things are good, but to be able to pen test to the level where you can actually penetrate a well strengthened and well protected environment, OT environment, it's a little bit challenging in a when the facility is operating or operational. So in a nutshell, the differences in VA and PT in the OT environment, to summarize what we have just discussed, VA is more suitable for identifying and prioritizing known vulnerabilities, and PT is more suitable for testing the defenses that you have built through active exploitation. So once the vulnerabilities have been identified by the VA process and you have built your defenses, then you can do the PT to check if the defenses are strong enough or not. VA is obviously non-intrusive. PT is intrusive, we already know that. Coverage, in my opinion, a good, very well-planned VA may cover the complete OT environment, just like we showed in the previous screen. All the networks, all the devices, all the applications, including the ones that are offline, that are disconnected. PT would only be, in most cases, It covers either specific networks like the DMZ, specific devices, specific applications. I've seen a lot of use cases for application testing where PT, you're able to break into the application, but on the network side and on the devices, usually it's a limited scope. The plant owner will say, oh, you're only allowed to touch these 7 computers, and that's it, nothing beyond that. Scope, the VA is suitable finding vulnerabilities, in my opinion, in people, process, and technology. In PT, the focus is typically on technology, while certain people or process aspects are used in the tools and techniques like phishing. If you send out a phishing email and a user clicks on it, yes, you have checked the people part of it a little bit. But the most focus in the PT is on the technology vulnerabilities. Results of the VA are more comprehensive in my opinion. And like I said, that if you have predefined list of what checks you will make, you will get a list of 100% or as complete as you can get to with a lot of effort, all the vulnerabilities that exist, and then you can decide which ones to address and which ones to not. PT most likely will not provide you a comprehensive list of vulnerabilities because of all these things we talked about. The scope is limited, there are constraints, so it will only give you the vulnerabilities that you have actually tried to exploit, and that's about it. In terms of timing, in my opinion, VA needs to be done for sure at the early stages of your cybersecurity journey. And then you would have periodic updates. And PT should be done once you have done the implementation. Frequency, VA is done a lot more frequent. After the initial assessment is done, a lot of even regulatory standards, they talk about, regular assessments could be once a year, twice a year, something like that. So it's a lot more frequent. PT in general is more event driven or in certain cases based on certain threats that you may have. So PT can be done, but it's a lot less frequent than VA. From risk perspective, if properly done, the VA doesn't pose any significant risk to the to the industrial operation, but PT, depending on the scope, and that's why a lot of people, they don't like to do it in the live environment because it's high risk for operational disruption. In terms of constraints, PT, obviously, for sure, VA can be done in an operational facility. PT is usually performed in test environment or non-operational facilities for the reasons we discussed earlier. In a nutshell, these are the key takeaways from our discussion. There is no question that both VA and PT, they play a very important role in the overall OT cybersecurity journey, for sure. The point is not to downplay the criticality or the importance of PT, but we just need to understand that VA is not the same as PT. They're totally different things. Comprehensive VA is a must to build cybersecurity. So you have to start from here. If you have not done vulnerability assessment, you cannot implement a good design. But there is no point in doing the PT at the VA stage. Remember the house we talked about, or the umbrella. If you already know that there are vulnerabilities and there could be more vulnerabilities, why invite a pen tester when you know that they'll be able to just push the door and get in? So a comprehensive assessment of vulnerability assessment upfront, and then the governance and the design based on the assessment and the risk analysis is done. Then the implementation is done. You have built your defenses. And now that you have built the defenses and you're saying, okay, well, nobody can get in. It may be okay to bring in pen testers to check that the defenses are strong enough or not. So please do not substitute VA with PT. If you are writing any scope for VA PT, yes, when you're doing PT, there is some VA aspect of it. Remember, I made this. When you're doing in PT, there is some shared VA. You will run maybe similar tools that you have for VE. You may still have a network scanner or Nmap or ZenMap or anything like that, but the results will be very different from a true comprehensive VA. So do not substitute VA with PT. That's about it for the discussion today, and I'll open the forum for questions. So you can ask, you can type your questions on the Q&A chat box, and I will be happy to answer the questions. All right, so one question. Aren't the tools and techniques for PT the same as VA? Partially, yes. Like I said, that some of the scanning tools or the I guess network assessment tools are shared between VA and PT. But the use of those tools, like I said, that in the constrained environment, OT environment, you will not be able to use the same tools on every level. So I'll go back here. That I'll definitely not run those tools over here. You install Nmap and try to scan the network. Whether something happens or not, that's a different discussion. And once again, that's the topic of our next webinar, whether active scanning is okay or not for the OT environment. But you will not get permission in a live operational plant to, in most cases, to scan these networks. So yes, you will run the same tools maybe up here to check which computers have any kind of vulnerabilities, which ports are open, which services are running, maybe which device is communicating to which server or computer on the OT environment. So you can, do a man in the middle or just, pivot onto it to the OT. So yeah, the tools may be the same, but the use case is very different in PT. All right, and another question. And feel free to type the questions on the Q&A box. There is on your computers or mobile phones or the devices. There's a box that has a question mark on it. Just click on it and feel free to ask questions. Another question is that doesn't the comprehensive VA that you talked about, doesn't it take a long time? Well, the answer is yes, because it is comprehensive. So you will have to, and especially in those environments where you cannot run any kind of scanners or vulnerability assessment tools, you will have to go down to the devices and maybe check which ones have what firmware is running on each of these PLCs and RTUs, and on those firmware, what are the different vulnerabilities, which services are running. I actually, once found a lot of PLCs had FTP and Telnet enabled. There were some RTUs and they had FTP and Telnet enabled, which were not even required for the operation of the control system, but they were enabled. Now, it's a running an operational plant. Yes, if I ran a scanning tool or an Nmap, it would give me those results, but I was not allowed to. So I had to actually go into the configuration of each device, each PLC to figure it out. And yes, wherever you are allowed to run any kind of maybe passive scanning engines or active scanning engines, sure, use it. But in either case, in all cases, such tools will only give you the technology part of the answer. It will not give you the vulnerabilities and the people in the process. Like I said, that If you don't have any backup of this application server, or even if the backup was taken, it was not encrypted, or if it was encrypted, it was never tested for restore, that's a vulnerability. Or if this particular PC, let me put this one over here, this one has a USB plugged into it because it's an engineering workstation and the engineer needed to transfer some files or whatever. You will need to find a way to determine which USB ports are enabled, which ones are locked, and the ones that are enabled where you have intentionally allowed the engineer to use the USB port. Are the right protocols being followed? Is the correct USB being used? Is the login that is used for the USB access, does it have administrative access? So there are a lot of details when you talk about vulnerabilities. The list that I mentioned that you should make, it's a very comprehensive list. And yes, once you do that assessment, it will give you a true picture of the vulnerabilities in your organization. All right, another question about what about the offline systems? Yes, that's the offline systems are a big headache in the OT environment, and by offline we mean all these on the side, and maybe these ones on the remote support side, because these are not always connected. So you should probably do a pen testing on this side of the firewall to see whether the defense is strong enough or not. But for you to do a PT on the remote computers, that itself is a bit of a challenge. It depends on the scope and the scale of PT. What I've seen is in most cases, this part is where the PT is limited in the OT environment. Usually the PT scope doesn't go out to the vendors and maybe the local control terminals. Usually it's focused on either the edge devices, the perimeter defense, or maybe the level 4 and the DMZ part of the network. All right. Another question about the application testing, that how much of PT in the OT environment is done on the applications themselves. So I guess the question is about, let's say I have this historian over here or this MES system. So typically the focus is more on determining the vulnerabilities in the operating system. Again, if I give the example that the attacker or the pen tester is sitting on the IT environment, their goal would be to somehow scan the network, get through the firewall into the historian part. But testing the historian itself, usually I have not seen that. The pen testing in OT environment focuses more on the scenarios that if, let's say, a person sitting on the IT computer clicks on a phishing link and the attacker steals the password, and then this server here was communicating with the AMS, so you try to pivot from the IT server to the OT server. Those kind of things I've seen, but actual pen testing on the OT applications, usually I don't see that. But in a lot of these cases, I'd reiterate that I've seen many pen test reports, and in most cases, when the pen testing is done in the OT environment, the report is focusing more on the updates are missing here, and the patches are missing here, and the SNMP port is open over here, and the FTP port is open over here, which is good. But you could figure that out from a comprehensive vulnerability assessment. And once again, don't take me wrong, I'm not saying PT is not important, but strictly from OT environment, until you have done the VA and until you have done the design and implementation, going into PT is, in my opinion, a little bit of waste of resources. Do the VA first and then the PT. I'd like to hear from maybe those folks who have done PT, especially successfully in the OT environment. There were a couple of you on the in the session today. So feel free to throw your comments, your opinions in the question box. I'll throw this slide again up here. This one, as soon as it shows up, the conclusion slide. This sequence, in my opinion, is the most important takeaway. If you can take anything from this session, that this part needs to be done up front and PT needs to be done when it's suitable. It could be in the middle as well, but only when you've done the implementation. Once you have strengthened your defenses, only then it makes sense to test the defenses to see if they're strong enough or not. All right, so we're almost out of time. We'll leave it at that. I'll just show this last slide up there. Our next session will be on the 28th of August, 3 p.m. KSA time. And the topic would be active network scanning in OT environment. We touched a little bit on it earlier in the discussion. It's like another sensitive topic. A lot of asset owners, they get scared of it. There is some truth to it, but exactly what that is and what can and cannot be done, we'll talk about that next month.